Thus I was able to see the changing world in a series of glimpses.
Time travel is a popular science fiction genre, but here's a feature film adaptation of a book that, even without a paternity test, is clearly the granddaddy of most of them. A man from 1900 travels 800,000 years into the future in a vain attempt to avoid the Macarena. The Time Machine.
Your store is magnificent. The splendid achievements, the gigantic strides that mankind has taken.
Come along, young men. Come along. We'd better hurry or the mushrooms will be sprouting.
H.G. Wells was one of those writers who came up with multiple seminal science fiction works. He gave us The Invisible Man, The War of the Worlds, The Island of Dr. Moreau, as well as a story about time travel, which was his first published novel, The Time Machine. In that book, an unnamed narrator tells some disbelieving friends about his adventures in the far future, where the remnants of civilization had changed beyond recognition. I once travelled 300 years into the future, but unfortunately they were still making Fast and Furious movies. Look, having said that, I really didn't mind the musical one so much, the Allegro and Fortissimo.
Only my speed through time saved me from being roasted alive and encased in stone forever.
By the end of the 1950s, producer George Pal had made a number of effects-heavy films, including a 1953 adaptation of another Wells story, The War of the Worlds. He'd been involved with one attempt to make a version of The Time Machine before financing fell through, though he'd later managed to get MGM interested in taking on the project. The Time Machine would be Pal's second feature as both producer and director, and would be made on a tight budget on sound stages in Culver City. The film cost $1 million and was shot in less than a month, which also accurately describes Auntie Beryl's thrill-seeking summer vacation of 1982. It's January 1900 and a group of friends meet up for dinner.
George merely says that if he's not here by 8 o'clock, then we're to begin without him.
Well, acquaintances, because with friends like these, who needs nemesis? Their host arrives late, and what's worse, he hasn't even dressed for dinner. Harumph. The man, known only as George, tries to explain what he's been up to since they last met on New Year's Eve, just a few days earlier. There, he had shown them his latest invention, the Matchbox car, but one that supposedly also travels in time. They harumph some more because that's what it says in the script, and they leave, apart from David, who's concerned his friend is having serious mental health issues. But this being the 1900s, he ends up doing nothing about it. George decides to try out the full-sized model of his time machine. It's a state-of-the-art work of art. It has all the latest features. Well, it has a seat. And it's got a lever, and that's about it. No cup holders, parking sensors, no Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, and the handbrake requires a subscription. George pushes forward a few hours. And then emboldened tries a few days, where his travelling forward in time is demonstrated by a store mannequin across the street. After a few years, his house is boarded up and George investigates, where at first he thinks he's talking to his friend David. Turns out to be his son Jamie, during what turns out to be the First World War.
Who are you, sir? Just a stranger who once knew your father.
He pushes ahead further still.
This was a new war. I decided to push on into time and see the outcome of this.
And then he reaches the mid-1960s.
Hi, Dilly, all clear! But Philby, I've got to talk to you!
Where our hero is so heroic, he survives a nuclear attack and a volcanic eruption in the space of a few minutes. But before his craft is engulfed by lava, he pushes the control lever all the way forward, stopping 800,000 years in the future. He's very happy to be alive, but also can't remember if he left a light on in the kitchen.
And man finally learned to control both the elements and himself.
In the far, 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 far future, all semblance of war, poverty, and the Macarena seems to have been left in the past. He meets the Eloi, a group of young people who don't seem to do much but swan about and frolic. Even one of them almost drowning doesn't seem to rouse them. Lending a helping hand to somebody in distress sounds too much like socialism for the Eloi. George tries to find out why the Eloi are the way they are, from a young woman he rescued. Her name is Weena. No, seriously, he even writes it down for her. The Eloi are not a curious lot, nor are they particularly dynamic.
Doesn't anybody work?
No,
Where does all that come from?
it grows.
It always grows.
They have books, but they don't seem too interested in what's in them. George realizes that it's a major end of civilization type problem when people are uninterested or hostile to the knowledge contained in books. But at the same time, he realizes there's probably an opening in the market for that Thai cookbook he's always wanted to write. He does find a high-tech system of playing back audio logs, which are spinning rings, which sounds like cool technology, except it can't hold too much information. You would need a very large mail sack just to hold the instructions for a leaf blower, and then you've got to go through all the rings. And wouldn't you know it, the first half dozen you listen to are the French instructions. Spinning rings as a playback system would be impractical to use while, jogging, or exercising, or listening to a podcast in the car. George is fed up with the Eloy, Weena aside, because dealing with the Eloy seems about as pleasant as breaking your leg after failing to pull a 720 on a skate ramp at 2 AM after a night at the pub. Look, I do know that is curiously specific, but they do say, write what you know. The time machine has been captured and put behind the doors of a mysterious sphinx, and then air raid sirens spool up. The sirens put the Eloy into a type of trance that compels them to head into the sphinx. George climbs down a vent to find the Morlocks, the descendants of humans who sought refuge underground, who have been feasting on fresh Eloy. George manages to free Weena and the surviving Eloy and is considering a new life when he gets trapped inside the Sphinx. Surrounded by Morlocks, he returns to his own time rather than end up as a Happy Meal. The film's flashback ends with George's contemporaries harumphing even more indignantly by the outrageous story from George that deserves not only contempt but even more harumphing. The end of the film sees David work out that George had moved the time machine so he could return to the future to be with Weena.
Build a new world for himself.
The Time Machine is a film where the first half takes place on a few sets, redressed for different time periods. A few rooms of George's house, his conservatory, and the street outside. And then later on you have some sets that look large and impressive. The Eloy eat al fresco, mainly because without building a roof, those scenes could be shot with natural light. The caves inhabited by the Morlocks aren't especially vast, but you get a sense there's a lot going on underground, like an orgy in a subway station. There's just enough scale to hint at a larger world, but our traveller can only narrate on what he's actually seen with his own eyes, which for some doesn't seem to be a prerequisite to review movies. As it's a George Pal movie, there are quite a few special effects, a lot of time-lapse effects work, some stop motion that works a little less well, and some just adequate model work to simulate the nuclear attack that becomes a volcanic eruption. The design of the Morlocks is suitably creepy with their glowing eyes. Creepy like that voicemail I got at 3 AM from an unknown number.
Oh God, I think I just ran over. Never mind, it was just my foot.
Australian Rod Taylor was younger than the original idea for the character, but this made him perfect for the physical stuff later in the film, where he punches Morlocks in the face for about 10 minutes. The Time Machine would be his first lead role in a major motion picture, and he's pretty good in the role. He would go on to star in things like The Birds, as well as other TV shows and movies over the years, and he would later pop up in Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards.
A larger model can be used to carry a passenger on a journey through time. Not through space, mind you, but through time.
Yvette Mimieux, later to star in The Black Hole, was 17 and pretty inexperienced for somebody in a major role.
There's no future.
She was a fast learner, which would lead George Pal to reshoot some of her early scenes once she was more comfortable in front of the camera.
Haven't we met somewhere before?
Indeed we have, Mr. Philby. Right there. Many years ago.
Alan Young was familiar to fans of Mr. Ed. Sebastian Cabot was later a butler in the sitcom Family Affair, and Whit Bissell would be a regular in Irwin Allen's series The Time Tunnel. Pal's earlier film The War of the Worlds, while having special effects that have held up very well, does seem quaint in other ways. It was updated to a then contemporary 1950s America, but those updates date the film more than anything else. For The Time Machine, we have the inverse. The effects don't always hold up as well, but as it's a period piece, the non-effects parts of the film have not dated anywhere near as badly.
I'll be damned.
The Time Machine itself is a lovely design. The ornate prop has remained fairly iconic. I mean, it does look like a bathtub and a newly renovated vintage bed and breakfast in New England, but it does travel into the far future rather than just the past.
Aren't you the least bit interested in who I am? Where I come from?
Should I be?
Time travel is a well-loved genre. Variations on the subject have brought us Doctor Who, Back to the Future, Quantum Leap, The Time Tunnel, some of the best installments of Star Trek, but at its core, it's often a subgenre of the fish out of water scenario. The time traveller has to work out what's going on wherever he ends up. He occasionally makes wrong assumptions, whether it's about fashion sold by a store so cheap they use the same mannequin for decades, or what war he happens to have stumbled into, or how the Eloi managed to survive with no idea of critical thinking. As this is an early example of time travel, there is just time travel. There's no debate over the ethics or dangers of time travel, no moral quandary about changing history or destroying the future, which, I mean, if you're a butterfly, is absolutely terrible, terrible news.
If that machine can do what you say it can, destroy it. Destroy it, George, before it destroys you.
There had been other stories about characters travelling in time, but that was often about somebody oversleeping because their alarm didn't go off and somehow they woke up decades later without having aged and everything is different. Something similar once happened to me. I had an afternoon nap and when I woke up, everything was different. I thought I'd slept for 3 days straight. It turns out it had just clouded over and rained for a bit and I'd only been asleep for 35 minutes. Time travel movies aren't about predicting the future, they're usually about examining the present, with somebody comparing the new situation to what they know. The book pretty much skips from its starting point to the far future, and there's a lot more detail in what transpires between the Eloi and the Morlocks. Wells wanted to extrapolate themes and issues from his era into the far future to see where they went. The film, on the other hand, simplifies things in the future, but adds in world wars and a nuclear holocaust in the mid-60s, as you do. The Time Machine, made on a modest budget, was also a modest success, but it would turn out to be quite influential. The Time Machine wasn't the first story to play around with time or even travelling in time. It would become a sort of a template that almost every other time travel story would owe a small debt. It's not only provided inspiration for countless other stories, but also would be retold several times. An updated 1978 TV movie, or a 2002 remake starring Guy Pearce, a film directed by Simon Wells, the grandson of the original author. The movie and the story would also provide the inspiration for a film that was not quite a sequel but more of a pastiche. Nicholas Meyer's film Time After Time took a time-travelling Victorian, Herbert George Wells, to San Francisco in 1979, where he would fall in love and have to stop Jack the Ripper from killing his girlfriend, specifically in that order. The Time Machine is a classic novel turned into a, I suppose, classica movie, without which we wouldn't have an entire strand of science fiction. The movie on its own is a thoughtful and fun film worth watching now, or in 800,000 years. If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.